It was a warm Saturday afternoon when everything I thought I knew about my family quietly started to fall apart. You know those moments in life that seem small at first, but later, you realize they changed everything? That's exactly how it started for me. I was 17, still in high school, living what most would call a normal life. My parents had been married for over 20 years. My dad was this calm, predictable guy, the kind who always came home at 6, watched the news, and made bad dad jokes at dinner. My mom was loving, kind, and always humming around the house. We weren't perfect, but we were stable. Or at least, that's what I believed. The story I'm about to tell you isn't something I ever planned to share. It's something I've carried like a weight on my chest for years, a secret so heavy, it almost broke me. A secret that started one evening when I accidentally found myself in the middle of something I had no business seeing. Something I still wish I could unsee. It happened in the most ordinary way, too. I had forgotten my phone charger in my dad's car. He had just gotten home, and his keys were still in the ignition. I remember jogging out barefoot, thinking I'd just grab it quickly and go back to texting my friends. But when I opened the car door, my phone wasn't where I'd left it. As I searched the center console, I noticed a small white envelope tucked beneath the seat. I wasn't the kind of kid to snoop, but something about it caught my eye. It had my dad's handwriting on it. And worse, it was addressed to someone who definitely wasn't my mom. At first, I thought maybe it was for a coworker or some old friend. I told myself not to overthink it. But curiosity is a strange thing. Especially when you're a teenager and you sense that something's off. I opened it. And what I read, it didn't just confuse me. It shook me. Inside were words from a version of my dad I didn't recognize. Words full of emotion, longing, guilt. He was writing to a woman named Clara. He was saying things like, "I wish we had more time," and "I think about you when I'm home, even when she's sitting right beside me." He signed it, "Forever, M." I stared at that letter for a long time, my stomach in knots. My dad, my dependable, gentle, always there dad, was in love with someone who wasn't my mom. Or at least, it sure seemed like it. And just like that, the ground beneath my feet didn't feel solid anymore. I put the letter back and didn't tell anyone. Not even my best friend. I couldn't. I didn't know what it meant, or how to explain what I had seen. But from that day on, I began to notice things. The way my dad looked at his phone when he thought no one was watching. The mysterious work trips that suddenly became more frequent. The way he sometimes came home smelling like a different kind of perfume than my mom's. Part of me wanted to confront him. To scream at him. To ask him how he could do this to us, to her. But another part of me was terrified. What if I was wrong? What if I destroyed my family over a misunderstanding? Or worse, what if I was right and everything I loved would come crashing down because of it? So I kept the secret. And every day, it got heavier. You might be wondering, why am I telling you this now? Why here? The truth is, this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about the impossible position I found myself in, the emotional war I fought in silence, and the way one secret can echo through every part of your life. I know I'm not the only one who's ever discovered something they wish they hadn't. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear this. Because holding on to a secret like that, it changes you. But what happened next? What did I do with the truth? Did I ever confront him? Did my mom find out? I wish I could say it all ended neatly. That the truth came out and everything made sense. But the truth has a funny way of being messier than we ever expect. I'll tell you the rest soon. But for now, I'll leave you with this: sometimes, the people we think we know best are carrying the biggest secrets. And sometimes, keeping someone else's secret can quietly tear your world apart. After that day, nothing felt normal anymore, even though on the outside, everything looked exactly the same. My dad still came home at the same time, still kissed my mom on the cheek as if nothing was wrong. But I couldn't unsee what I saw. I couldn't forget the name Clara, or the way he had written that letter, so full of emotion, almost like he was living a second life right under our roof. I tried to focus on school, on friends, on anything that would help me forget. But once you know something like that, it becomes part of you. It's always there, in the back of your mind, changing the way you see everything. I started watching him more closely. I noticed how he'd smile at my mom, but his eyes didn't always follow the smile. I noticed how he'd quickly put his phone face down when someone walked by. Little things. Tiny signs I would have missed if I didn't already know. It made me feel like I was living in a fake version of my life, like the walls of our house were painted with lies no one could see but me. One day, while helping my dad clean out the garage, I found an old box tucked behind a stack of books. I wasn't trying to snoop, but when I opened it, I found pictures, not of our family, but of him with another woman. Clara. I knew it had to be her. She had kind eyes, long hair, and in every photo, she looked at my dad like she knew him in a way none of us did. My hands started to shake as I flipped through the pictures. They were taken in places we'd never been, like parks and small restaurants. Places where no one would recognize them. Hidden parts of his life I wasn't supposed to see. That night, I barely spoke at dinner. I looked at my mom, laughing at some story he was telling, and I felt sick. How could she not know? Or maybe she did know and was pretending, just like me. That was another thought I couldn't shake. What if we were all pretending, all holding secrets of our own? My mom had always been the emotional one, always tuned into our moods, but she didn't seem to notice anything off. Or maybe she just didn't want to. The worst part was how alone I felt. I couldn't talk to anyone. If I told my mom, I'd be breaking something that could never be fixed. If I told my dad I knew, he might lie, or worse, he might confess and change everything. So I said nothing. I held on to the truth like it was a dangerous object I wasn't meant to touch. And as days turned into weeks, I started to feel different. Not just sad or confused, something deeper, like I had been pushed into adulthood before I was ready. My dad didn't seem like a bad person. That's what made it harder. He was kind, thoughtful, and had always been there for me. That made the betrayal even more confusing. It wasn't like he'd suddenly turned into someone else, it was like there was this whole other version of him I had never met. And I couldn't stop wondering, how long had it been going on? Was it just emotional? Was it physical? Did he love her more than he loved my mom? I became obsessed with the details. Every time he left the house, I wondered where he was going. Every time his phone buzzed, I thought of Clara. I was stuck in a world of quiet paranoia, and it was eating at me from the inside. I was angry, but I didn't know who to blame. Him? Her? Myself for not doing something? What scared me most was the fear that maybe secrets like this didn't just live in one part of a family, they spread. They sink into everything. I started to wonder what else I didn't know. What other truths were being hidden behind fake smiles and polite small talk. And as much as I wanted answers, I wasn't sure I was ready for what I might find if I kept digging. But I kept digging anyway. The hardest part was pretending I didn't know. Every morning, I'd wake up and hear my parents talking in the kitchen, casual, everyday stuff like bills, dinner plans, weather. But it all sounded fake now, like a script they didn't realize they were reading from. I'd sit there at breakfast, my dad across the table, smiling like nothing was wrong, while my mind ran wild with questions. Did he think he was hiding it well? Did he ever feel guilty when he looked at us? The tension built in ways that felt invisible to everyone else but unbearable to me. I started getting headaches, zoning out in class. My teachers noticed, but I didn't have the words to explain what was going on. I couldn't tell them I was falling apart because my dad was probably cheating and I was the only one who knew. I didn't even know if cheating was the right word, it wasn't just physical betrayal, it was emotional. Emotional infidelity. And somehow, that made it worse. Because it meant he had a real connection with someone who wasn't my mom. I started following the patterns. Tuesdays and Thursdays, he stayed late at work. Sometimes he'd come back with takeout from restaurants too far from his office. I'd Google the names of the places on the bags and find they were near neighborhoods where Clara might live. I didn't even know who she really was, just a first name and a face from a photo, but I began to build a version of her in my head. I pictured her as warm, maybe even gentle, the kind of person who could pull someone into her life without force. That made it scarier. She didn't seem like someone who wanted to destroy a family. She seemed like someone who believed she had a place in his world, too. One night, I overheard my parents arguing softly behind their bedroom door. It wasn't a loud fight, just quiet words exchanged in low voices, too muffled to make out. But it was enough to spark something in me. Maybe my mom was starting to notice, or maybe she already knew more than I thought. That idea alone opened a new flood of questions. What if they were both just pretending? What if this whole family was a performance? And then there was my own guilt. I hated my dad for lying, but I also hated myself for not speaking up. I began wondering if keeping this secret made me just as guilty. Each day I stayed silent, the weight of it grew heavier, and I could feel it starting to crack the version of me I used to be. The hardest part was pretending I didn't know. Every morning, I'd wake up and hear my parents talking in the kitchen, casual, everyday stuff like bills, dinner plans, weather. But it all sounded fake now, like a script they didn't realize they were reading from. I'd sit there at breakfast, my dad across the table, smiling like nothing was wrong, while my mind ran wild with questions. Did he think he was hiding it well? Did he ever feel guilty when he looked at us? The tension built in ways that felt invisible to everyone else but unbearable to me. I started getting headaches, zoning out in class. My teachers noticed, but I didn't have the words to explain what was going on. I couldn't tell them I was falling apart because my dad was probably cheating and I was the only one who knew. I didn't even know if cheating was the right word. It wasn't just physical betrayal, it was emotional. Emotional infidelity. And somehow, that made it worse. Because it meant he had a real connection with someone who wasn't my mom. I started following the patterns. Tuesdays and Thursdays, he stayed late at work. Sometimes he'd come back with takeout from restaurants too far from his office. I'd Google the names of the places on the bags and find they were near neighborhoods where Clara might live. I didn't even know who she really was, just a first name and a face from a photo, but I began to build a version of her in my head. I pictured her as warm, maybe even gentle, the kind of person who could pull someone into her life without force. That made it scarier. She didn't seem like someone who wanted to destroy a family. She seemed like someone who believed she had a place in his world, too. One night, I overheard my parents arguing softly behind their bedroom door. It wasn't a loud fight, just quiet words exchanged in low voices, too muffled to make out. But it was enough to spark something in me. Maybe my mom was starting to notice, or maybe she already knew more than I thought. That idea alone opened a new flood of questions. What if they were both just pretending? What if this whole family was a performance? And then there was my own guilt. I hated my dad for lying, but I also hated myself for not speaking up. I began wondering if keeping this secret made me just as guilty. Each day I stayed silent, the weight of it grew heavier, and I could feel it starting to crack the version of me I used to be. Days passed, but the secret felt like it was alive, pulsing beneath the surface of everything. Every glance my dad threw my way felt loaded with meaning I couldn't quite read. I started catching him looking at me differently, like maybe he knew I was onto him, or maybe he just sensed I was slipping away, lost in my own storm of doubt and confusion. I didn't know if it was guilt or fear in his eyes, but it kept me on edge. One evening, I was supposed to be asleep when I heard my parents talking again. This time, their voices were sharper, the quiet anger unmistakable. I couldn't make out what they said, but the tension was so thick it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I wanted to knock on the door, to scream for the truth, but my feet wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, stuck between wanting to know and fearing what I might discover. The days after that argument were the worst. My dad started coming home later, sometimes not until after midnight. He was distant, distracted, and every time I tried to ask him a question, he'd brush me off with a forced smile or a vague excuse. I saw my mom retreat into herself, quieter than usual, like she was waiting for something to happen but didn't know what. The house felt colder, emptier, even though we were all still there. I began to realize that the secret wasn't just about a letter or a hidden love. It was about trust breaking apart, piece by piece, until nothing felt real anymore. And I was stuck in the middle, a silent witness to a family unraveling in slow motion. There was one night, though, when everything came to a head. I caught my dad's phone buzzing again, but this time, instead of hiding it, he left it out on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a message from Clara. My heart pounded as I stared at the words. This was it, the moment when the secret could no longer be hidden, when the truth might finally explode. But what would happen next? Would everything come crashing down, or would we somehow pretend it never happened? The tension was unbearable, and I knew I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't walk away from. I stared at that message on the screen, my hands shaking as I debated what to do next. But before I could even think of grabbing the phone, I heard footsteps behind me. My dad's voice was quiet but sharp as he asked, "What are you doing up?" The shock in his eyes wasn't just about me being awake, it was like he'd caught me in a lie I didn't even know I was telling myself. I dropped the phone back onto the counter, but the damage was done. The silence between us stretched out, thick and heavy, as if we both knew that nothing would ever be the same again. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of anger or denial, my dad's face fell, and for the first time, I saw a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. He said, "There's more to this than you know." That phrase haunted me because it meant the secret I had been carrying wasn't just about an affair or a letter. It was deeper, more complicated. And I realized I was nowhere near ready to understand it. The next days were a whirlwind of confusion. My mom started asking questions, her voice quieter but more insistent. My dad seemed more distant, but also haunted, as if a part of him was fighting a battle I couldn't see. And then, out of nowhere, I discovered another layer to the story. Clara wasn't just someone from my dad's past. She was connected to my family in a way I never imagined. A connection so close that it shook the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my parents. Suddenly, this wasn't just a story about infidelity. It was about secrets buried deep, about trust that had been broken for years, and about the impossible choices we make to keep those secrets hidden. And now, with everything unraveling faster than I could keep up, I realized that the next steps I took could change everything, for my family, for me, and for the life I thought I had. The tension was unbearable. The secret was no longer mine alone. And the question hanging in the air was clear: how far would I go to protect the truth, and at what cost? The moment I realized Clara's connection to our family was when everything came crashing down. One afternoon, I found an old photo album tucked away in my mom's closet. Among the pictures was a faded photo of my dad and Clara, but not in the way I expected. Clara was standing next to my mom, smiling warmly. They weren't just acquaintances, they were sisters. My dad had been carrying a secret that went beyond infidelity. Clara wasn't just a stranger. She was family. I confronted my dad that night. The truth spilled out in a way I wasn't ready for. Years ago, before he met my mom, he had been in love with Clara. But their relationship was complicated, full of broken promises and pain. When Clara married someone else, my dad moved on and married my mom, trying to bury the past. But the feelings never fully disappeared. The letters, the late-night calls, they were his way of holding on to a love he thought he had lost forever. My mom had known about Clara all along. She had found the letters years ago and chose to stay silent, hoping the past wouldn't destroy what they had built. It was a fragile truce built on unspoken pain, and I had unknowingly walked into the middle of it. Just when I thought I had understood everything, the final twist hit me like a storm. Clara's husband had recently passed away, and she was now reaching out, not just to my dad, but to the entire family, wanting to reconnect. The secret that was meant to stay buried was about to resurface in a way none of us expected. The story wasn't over, and neither was the pain. Sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones that bind us, and the ones we're most afraid to face. After that revelation, everything changed. Our family had been living with a secret so deep it shaped the way we all connected, even if none of us fully understood it before. When Clara reached out, it wasn't just about reopening old wounds, it was about healing. My parents sat me down, and for the first time, we talked honestly about pain, forgiveness, and what family really means. It wasn't easy. Trust had been broken in ways I never imagined, and the scars didn't disappear overnight. But we learned that keeping secrets only makes the weight heavier. Facing the truth, as hard as it was, gave us a chance to rebuild something real. My dad apologized, not just to my mom, but to me, for the silence, the lies, and the part of himself he hid away. My mom showed a strength I hadn't noticed before, choosing love and hope over bitterness. And I realized that families aren't perfect. They're messy, complicated, and sometimes carry secrets that could tear them apart. But they can also survive those secrets if people are willing to be honest, even when it hurts. This story taught me that infidelity isn't always what it seems on the surface. Sometimes, it's tied to deeper struggles, loss, regret, or unfinished stories from the past. And sometimes, the hardest secret we keep is the one we carry inside ourselves. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever faced something similar, remember you're not alone. Sometimes the toughest moments lead to the strongest bonds. And sometimes, the truth, no matter how painful, is the first step toward healing. 8.